Good afternoon. My name is Scott Berry from Apple Designs. I'm also with me, Gabor. We're going to have sort of 30 minutes with you webinar on virtual building and BIMcloud. For those of you unfamiliar with Graphisoft products, this BIMcloud has primarily been deployed in larger studios since its launch in 2014. The latest solution, though, based around ArchiCAD 21, offers affordable collaboration environment for studios and for the smaller studio, and also for projects of any size. We're looking today to show you how this platform allows you to work through the office and also over the web through a single model, dramatically reducing the amount of data being transferred, and we'll explain how that sort of technology works. We're also looking at sort of mobile communication as well. So today we'll be able to show you how an enhanced features of BIM Explore or BIMX allows you to communicate back to the project team through redlining environment and also communication. So I'll pass you over to Gabor. I'm going to help him with some of the collaboration part of the presentation, and we'll pass you over. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. In that case, let's just get quickly started. In our presentation, we're going to do a quick recap on how things work in the BIM world, so everyone's up to speed with that, and then we'll take a look at features specific to BIMcloud. The core idea of BIM is the virtual building concept. What this means is that all building data is gathered in one central database, and then this data is accessed in different ways depending on what kind of data you're looking for at the time. So you can also get flat projections like elevations and sections out from this building model, whilst quantities and non-visual information like warranty periods and all the rest are also stored in this central database and are accessed in different ways through different platforms, depending on the kind of use that the data is required for. Now, once we have one of these central building models, we will need to access this in some way. So the moment more than one person starts to access this building model, we'll need to decide how the data transfer is going to be taken care of. Traditionally, the entire model was transferred at the same time every time someone has made a change. There is one issue with this, which is that this creates a bottleneck on the computer network, because if the entire building needs to be transferred, that means that only so much information can be pushed through the internet connection and the server's resources at the same time. Alternatively, which is what some competitors do, we have the segmented data transfer method, in which case the model is carved up into individual segments and individual blocks, and that every time a change is made in one of these blocks, the entire block is transmitted through the network. Yet again, this creates bottlenecks, even though not as big ones as the traditional transfer method. This still creates issues with network management and also with server resources, because the server has to compute and process all this information on one machine. So the best solution for the issue is the change-based or delta transfer method. In this case, instead of transferring blocks of the model, we only transfer the elements that actually contain the change. So if the user has only made a change to a single door in the building, then only that one single door is transferred through the network, and therefore only that single door needs to be processed by the server, which reduces these loads on both network and central infrastructure, allowing for much better utilization and also for much better efficiencies with computing requirements. Another issue that also needs to be discussed when using a central model is working around each other. So when we're all working on the same building model at the same time, we want to make sure that one element is only being changed by one person at a time. So to do this, we can assign particular elements or regions to users using a reservation system. So using a reservation system, everyone in the virtual space will know what belongs to whom, and therefore they're unable to work on them whilst those parts belong to someone else. They can, of course, communicate with this, and they can request these. Which brings me to my next point, which is communication. So because we're using this system in here, we'll need to be able to communicate with each other in a contextual basis. So we'll need to be able to say that we need to have this door, please, without having to actually prescribe where that door is or which door it is. And BIMcloud facilitates this in a very similar manner how BIM Server facilitates this by having an integrated messaging platform where we can assign elements to each other and where we can work together with each other. What BIMcloud brings to the table on top of the BIM Server capabilities is that this messaging platform has now been extended to mobile devices. So we can actually message with each other from afar whilst we're not in the office or on the same network. We can chime in from site where we don't take our laptops with us, and all of these things are possible through BIMcloud. Another important consideration to be made in these environments is rights management. So who's allowed to do what? And BIMcloud expands on this too. So we now have a very fine level of rights management detail that can be used to make sure that certain users are only allowed access to certain things. So for example, a client can be allowed in using this method, in which case the client is only allowed access to their own projects, and any other projects on the server are simply not visible to the client. He doesn't even know that they're there. So this is a quite important thing to do. Moving on from these, the next issue that presents itself is working from afar, so when you're not in the office. So the most traditional way of doing this is establishing a VPN connection. Using a VPN connection, different networks can be bridged together, as well as roaming clients can be assigned to these. Now, creating a VPN requires infrastructure and knowledge. So it's not as easy as pressing just a few buttons. You actually need to be able to know what you're doing when you're creating a VPN connection. Building onto this infrastructure, you can also take these projects away with you. So what you can do is create what's called a travel pack, in which case you're taking your reserved elements offline with you. So if you're sitting on a plane or are simply away from the internet, you can keep on working using these methods. However, what has brought the biggest breakthrough that has allowed BIMcloud to come to existence is a new method of approaching this, where every single individual connection is treated as a separate encrypted connection through HTTP. Now, what this means is that the server can now be moved away from a central location, so it no longer needs to be on the same network that the clients are on, because every single connection is encrypted individually and is managed individually between the server and the clients. Therefore, it doesn't matter where the client is, it can simply connect to the server. And this is how the BIMcloud works. So you can connect to a server from afar, even when you're in your main office. Now, this allows for quite a few possibilities. And the first one is a separation of roles. That instead of having to have one server, you can now have separate servers available for different functions to be fulfilled. Therefore, you can load distribute your projects. So if you know that a server needs to be closer to an office where a particular project is being worked on, you can simply just set up another server closer to the location or even within that particular office without having to redo your entire infrastructure. So the first and most important part of the BIMcloud is the BIMcloud Manager. The BIMcloud Manager doesn't actually host any data, so it doesn't host project or library data. All it does is maintains the user database. So what the BIMcloud Manager is responsible for is to maintain who the users are, what these users are allowed to do, and where the projects are to which these users have access. These manager components can also use central user management systems that some might already have in place. So for example, they can authenticate with Active Directory services through LDAP and basically any LDAP backend that is available for them. It's also possible to now support multiple versions at the same time. So you'll only need to have one BIMcloud where you can have multiple versions of the BIM server component available. So if you're not yet ready to migrate the project to the new version, you don't actually have to do it. You can simultaneously run projects in both the old and the new versions without conflict between the two. The next element is the BIMcloud server itself, which is the one that hosts all the project and library data. The user authorization for the server is actually managed by the manager component. Therefore, all the server has to do is connect to the manager, ask whether the user is allowed to perform a particular operation, and then it simply serves the user from its own local database. What this means is that you can have multiple servers for multiple offices whilst still being able to access information across these offices around the world. So if you have an office in London and you have another office in New York, New York is able to host your North American project and London is able to host your European project. And if there is a requirement to access a European project from New York, that is possible by simply logging into the BIMcloud wherever you are in the world. An optional additional component is called the Delta Cache. This is meant to ease the network traffic that is generated through these communications. This is a local component that will be installed on the local network, which basically takes the load off from the server by caching information that has been accessed. So any kind of information only needs to be accessed once from the server by delocation, regardless of the number of users at that location. Now, having this BIMcloud available does require a certain infrastructure that is to be available. We will have another webinar running exactly on these, so what is required. So I'm not going to go into any further detail on these, but there are networking requirements, so you have to have a proper networking infrastructure in place. If you want to secure this install to make sure no one snoops on what you do, you'll need to take additional steps to encrypt this traffic between these computers, and then you can also have central user management, which is something that is usually already available in larger organizations, whereas your already existing user database can be used to provide access to BIMcloud. This flexibility also gives us opportunities to manage the data differently now. So for example, like previously said, we can have multiple servers, so we can optimize by project use and office location. Centralized user management means that you only need to create users once, which means that your tech department or your IT department will not be backed up. And when you have a new start, it's not going to take longer for them to have access to the projects they need to. And alternatively, if someone suddenly departs the company, it's easy to just disable their access once, so data leakage can be blocked this way. This also means that you don't need to have a local server anymore in your office, because your infrastructure can actually be outsourced. so you don't need to sit right next to your BIM server in order to work together. Now we've set up one of these BIMclouds, and this is what we're about to show you. So our server is actually in Kassel, which is in Germany. This is a Windows server. It runs Windows Server 2016, but this is also available for Mac infrastructure, should that be required. And this server is running both the manager and the server at the same time. So if I move over into the background here, I've got ArchiCAD running. So this ArchiCAD is currently connected to that BIMcloud instance. So when we are working in BIMcloud, all we really need to do is work the same way we would normally work in BIM server. So we can look at the model here. ArchiCAD can color code the workspaces for me. So if I go back to the idea of this reservation system, if I ask ArchiCAD to show the reservations by users, I can see that nothing is currently reserved. Scott is also online in this BIMcloud. So whenever he starts working, I can see that he now started working on the rear extension in this project. So ArchiCAD now tells me that the elements he's using there have been reserved by him, so he can start working on those. I can also reserve elements for myself. So all I need to do, so for example, if I wanted to work on this window here or this wall here, all I need to do is select these elements and I can set reserve, which means that Scott will no longer be able to access these elements whilst I'm working with them. Whenever I press send and receive, we will connect to our BIMcloud. And this is when the changes are communicated. But because we're using this delta change technology, so this delta server technology, all we are communicating here is the changes. So only the elements I have just changed are the ones that are communicated through the network. Also, we can communicate with each other within this project. So for example, if I need to communicate with Scott here to see what's happening with the rear extension here, all I need to do is send a new message to Scott. So I can send this to Scott. I can ask him what's happening with the extension. And I can even capture a view so Scott knows exactly what I'm seeing on my screen when he receives this message. So if I click send, this has now been sent to Scott, and he'll be able to see this message and respond to it hopefully soon. I can also use the elements within the project to be included within these messages. So for example, if I would now like to start working on the rear extension here, I can send these to Scott and request these elements from him, just like he can from me. So if I send yet another message to Scott, I can compose this new message, and I can say that I need to work on the extension too. I can say that I'd like to, I can say that I would like him to now send and receive so that I can see the changes that he has made to these. So if I now tell Scott to send and receive along with this message that I just sent to him will now have a button which will allow him to send and receive instantly. He has already done that, so he has sent and received, so I am now ready to send and receive as well. So I can just go ahead and say that I would now like to see the changes that Scott has made. So when I press the send and receive button, ArchiCAD now connects to this BIMcloud instance and downloads the information, so I can now see what's happening with the rear extension. However, Scott still has these walls reserved, so if I select one of these walls, right-click on it, I can request these selected elements, in which case I can send Scott that particular wall and say that I would like to request these elements. In which case, when I send this request to Scott, he'll know exactly which wall I need, so he immediately has the button to release those. Now this messaging also works between mobile platforms. So as you can see, that wall has just turned yellow on my screen. That's because Scott has granted my request, so I can now start working on this wall here. This same messaging system is available for the mobile platform as well. So I have this very same project open on BIMx here, where Scott is logged in. So if I open the I apologize. If I open the iPad here, you can see that this very same project is open. Now, most of you will have encountered BIMx by now. BIMx is the mobile counterpart of ArchiCAD, which is a mobile presentation platform. So we can export these models to be used on an iPad, where these elements are all interconnected. So ArchiCAD knows where a section is and where a floor plan is. However, what's new with BIMcloud in BIMx is that I can now log in to one of these projects, so I can actually start communicating with, well, technically myself here at the moment. So for example, I can see that the messages that we've sent between each other so far, so these are the messages that we have just sent from the desktop platform, and also I can start writing new messages. So for example, if I have a question about something on the model, if I change my view to the model here, I can start composing a new message, in which case I can send this message to myself this time. I can include some text if I wish to. Need more glazing on rear. And then I can also attach a screenshot to this image, which I can then redline. So for example, if I attach what I see here, I have now created this image, and if I tap that little wiggle line there, I can start annotating this image. So for example, I can circle what I really mean by rear. I can write on it. And then if I save this and then send it to myself through the iPad here, by the time I get back to ArchiCAD here, this message will have reached me. So Scott has sent me this message, and in ArchiCAD here, I can see the image that has been sent to me. Also, because BIMx is content aware, I can also apply the exact same view that Scott was looking at on the iPad, so I know exactly what he means, and I can just start working on it. So I can pick up the window and make it larger should I need to. I can always visit the image that has been sent to me as well, so I can see it in larger detail. So that's all we can cover in this time frame today about BIMcloud. We will have another webinar running on the technical requirements behind BIMcloud. So tune in for that if you want to learn more about how BIMcloud works and when and how this will be available.